May 16, 1943, 23:28 hours. Over the Ruhr Valley, western Germany. The engines of the Lancaster howl low and steady, throttled back to a level that makes every man aboard uneasy. Too slow for safety. Too low for comfort. Flight Lieutenant John Leslie Les Munro grips the controls, eyes fixed on the black ribbon of water ahead as it rises to meet him. Below, the Murhan Dam stretches across the valley like a dark scar, its curved concrete face barely visible in the moonlight. The aircraft is flying at 60 feet. You can almost feel the air scraping the fuselage. Tracer fire reaches up from the Hilston, red fingers clawing at the bomber's belly. The German flak gunners are awake now. Searchlights stab the sky, crossing, uncrossing, hunting. Munro keeps the Lancaster steady anyway. Any climb, any wobble, and the entire plan collapses. Behind him, bomb aimer Flight Sergeant James Jimmy Clay grips his sight, lying flat in the nose. His world is a narrow tunnel of glass and shadow, the dam filling his vision as the seconds drain away. Two spotlights mounted under the aircraft converge on the water below and angled forward, one backward. When their beams meet, the Lancaster is exactly 60 feet above the surface. That is the magic number. Too high and the bomb skips wrong. Too low and it smashes uselessly into the water. The weapon beneath them is unlike anything ever dropped before. A cylindrical mine, code-named Upkeep, spinning backwards at 500 revolutions per minute. Designed by engineer Barnes Wallis, it is meant to skip across the reservoir like a stone, strike the dam, cling to it, then sink and detonate at depth where concrete is weakest. Every man aboard knows how absurd it sounds, and every man aboard knows it is their only chance. Steady, steady, Clay murmurs. The dam grows larger. Munro's mouth is dry. The aircraft is so low he can see the texture of the water ripples catching moonlight, distorted by wind and wake. Now, Clay says. Munro presses the release. The Lancaster jumps, suddenly lighter. Below, the bomb strikes the water and begins to skip once, Twissiatch bounce carrying it closer to the dam. Then it disappears against the concrete wall. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the night tears open. A colossal explosion erupts beneath the surface, a white shockwave punching upward as if the reservoir itself has been struck by a hammer. Water surges. Concrete fractures. A plume of spray and debris rises hundreds of feet into the air. The dam holds. For now. Munro banks hard, engines roaring as he climbs a way through flak that seems angrier than before. Behind him, other Lancasters are already lining up, flying the same suicidal path, one after another. The Germans fire wildly now, realizing too late that this is not a nuisance raid. This is something else. Minutes later, another bomb detonates. Then another's. On the fourth impact, the Murhan Dam breaks. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It simply gives up. A section of the wall collapses inward, and the reservoir millions of tons of water held back for decade surges through the gap. A black tidal wave pours into the valley, swallowing roads, factories, rail lines, and villages in seconds. Power stations vanish. Bridges are ripped from their foundations. Entire rail yards are lifted and scattered like toys. Downstream, German workers are asleep in their homes when the flood arrives. Some never wake. By dawn, the Ruhr-Valley industrial heart of Germany is drowning. Far from the dam, in Dusseldorf and Essen, factory managers arrive to find machines silent. Power is gone. Transformers are submerged. Rail schedules dissolve into chaos. Coal deliveries stop. Steel production stutters, then halts. In Berlin, reports begin to arrive in fragments. Broken dams. Flooded valleys. Entire regions without electricity. At first, German generals assume it is exaggerated. Sabotage, perhaps. A temporary disruption. Then the scale becomes impossible to ignore. The Murhan Dam is destroyed. The Eder Dam is breached hours later. Water management systems collapse. Mines flood. Repair crews are pulled from the front, thousands of engineers, construction workers, and guards diverted to emergency work that cannot wait. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, will later admit that the damage forces Germany to throw enormous resources into repair resources that can no longer build tanks, guns, or aircraft. For the men who planned the war as a contest of divisions and firepower, This is something entirely different. One night, one raid, and an entire region is paralyzed. Above the shattered valley, the Lancasters vanish back into the dark, heading for home. Many will not make it, but the damage is already done. For the first time, German commanders are forced to confront a reality they never fully believed possible. That a single, precisely aimed blow delivered far from the front lines can cripple the machinery of war itself. Shockwaves in concrete and command rooms. Dawn reveals the Ruhr Valley as something unrecognizable. Where orderly rivers once powered turbines and cooled factories, there is now a wide, brown scar carved through towns and fields. The floodwater has not rushed past it, has lingered, pooling in lowlands, choking basements, filling mines, leaving behind a thick paste of mud, debris, and silence. Rail lines hang twisted in the air, tracks peeled from their beds like torn wire. Locomotives lie on their sides, half submerged, steam long since gone cold. German engineers arrive first, boots sinking into sludge as they stare at what used to be the Murhan Dam. The breach is not a crack or a fissure rate, is a missing piece of the landscape. Tens of meters of concrete are simply gone, pulverized and swept downstream. No quick repair is possible. No patch. No workaround. Telephone lines begin to ring across western Germany. In Essen, Krupp factory managers report rolling blackouts that become total power loss. In Bochum, coal mines flood as pumps fail. In Dortmund, rail yards go dark, switching systems dead, schedules meaningless. Barges jam the canals, some sunk, others stranded by unpredictable water levels. The Ruhr does not stop dramatically. It stops piece by piece. At Wehrmacht headquarters, officers attempt to assemble a coherent picture from contradictory reports. A bridge down here, a power station offline there, an ammunition shipment delayed indefinitely. Nothing sounds decisive until someone overlays the map. Then the pattern emerges. This is not damage in one place. It is systemic disruption. The dams did not merely store water. They regulated flow, powered turbines, fed canals, stabilized transportation timetables that German industry depended on to function with clockwork precision. Remove them, and everything downstream becomes unreliable. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt reportedly mutters that the British have attacked Germany's bloodstream. Albert Speer sees it immediately. He is not concerned with the spectacle of destruction, is concerned with time, with labor, with priorities. Emergency crews must be mobilized at once. Concrete must be poured. Steel must be diverted. Anti-aircraft defenses must be redeployed to protect dams that were never considered frontline targets. Tens of thousands of workers are reassigned. Not soldiers, skilled men, engineers, electricians, construction specialists, men who were building weapons yesterday, men who will not be doing so tomorrow. Across the Reich, orders go out to fortify dams with additional flak batteries, smoke generators, barrage balloons, and guard units. Blueprints are redrawn, schedules rewritten, resources reallocated, all because one raid has demonstrated a vulnerability that cannot be ignored again. Meanwhile, British reconnaissance aircraft return over the Ruhr, photographing the damage in crisp detail. Analysts trace the flood's path, measuring collapsed infrastructure, counting disabled facilities. The results are passed quietly up the chain. The raid is not a fluke. It worked. Back in Germany, the psychological effect spreads faster than the physical damage. Local officials had believed dams were untouchable. Massive, permanent, too hardened, too vital to be risked. Now they are forced to explain to Berlin how a handful of aircraft penetrated defenses, flew at treetop height, and destroyed what years of Allied bombing had barely scratched. German generals are not accustomed to this kind of problem. You can move a division to block an advance. You can reinforce a coastline. But how do you defend every dam, every reservoir, every piece of civilian infrastructure that quietly keeps the war running? As the floodwaters recede, they leave behind more than wreckage. They leave fear. Fear that the enemy understands Germany's industrial anatomy better than Germany itself. In the weeks that follow, repair efforts are relentless. Workers labor day and night, pouring concrete under floodlights, erecting temporary structures, restoring partial flow. The Merhan Dam will eventually be repaired. So will the Eder. Power will return. Production will resume. But nothing returns to normal. Because from this point forward, Germany must defend not just factories but systems. Every repair ties down manpower. Every guard post consumes ammunition and attention. Every flak battery assigned to a dam is one not protecting a city, a rail hub, or a factory. German generals had assumed the Allies would fight the war by grinding forward slowly, expensively, predictably. Operation Chastise proves something else entirely. That the war can be attacked sideways, through mathematics, through engineering, through the deliberate breaking of connections that no frontline victory can replace. And as German command staff digest the implications, one realization settles heavily over their maps and reports. If one dam raid can do this, what else have they left exposed? The Ruhr Valley lies quiet under the moon, a dense web of rivers, factories, rail lines, and power stations woven together with ruthless efficiency. From the air, it looks almost peaceful. But every British planner knows the truth: this region is the industrial heart of Nazi Germany, pumping steel, coal, and electricity into the Reich's war machine day and night. At the center of it all stand the dams. The Merhan, the Eder, the supermassive concrete and earth structures built decades earlier, never intended as military targets. They hold back millions of tons of water, feeding hydroelectric plants, regulating river flow, cooling steel mills, and supplying cities that manufacture tanks, artillery, and aircraft engines. German generals consider them untouchable. Too large, too well defended, too difficult to destroy with conventional bombing. That belief has bred complacency. On the ground near the Merhan Dam, German sentries pace slowly along the crest. Their rifles hang loose on their shoulders. The anti-aircraft guns are present, yes, but their barrels point skyward, calibrated for high-altitude bombers, not low-flying intruders skimming treetops. Searchlights sweep lazily across the water, their beams pale and unfocused. No alarms sound. No one expects an attack tonight. Far away in England, Wing Commander Guy Gibson already understands what German command does not. Weeks earlier, inside briefing rooms thick with cigarette smoke and secrecy, Gibson studied maps spread across long wooden tables. Engineers from the Ministry of Aircraft Production had explained the theory again and again. The bomb must be released at exactly 60 feet above the water, traveling at a precise speed, spinning backward at 500 revolutions per minute. Only then would it skip across the surface, strike the dam wall, sink, and detonate at the correct depth. Any deviation too high, too low, too fast, and the mission would fail. To hit the dams, the crews must fly at treetop level, at night, through enemy territory, under fire with no margin for error. Now, as the bombers approach the Ruhr, that theory becomes reality. The first aircraft descends even lower. The pilot's knuckles whiten around the control column. Trees rush past beneath the wings. Church spires flash by in the darkness, missed by feet. Tracer fire suddenly erupts from a village amid thin red lines, snapping past the cockpit. The aircraft shudders as flak bursts nearby, peppering the fuselage with shrapnel. Inside, no one speaks. At the Merhan Dam, a German guard pauses. He hears something glow, unfamiliar. Not the distant drone of high bombers, but a fast, aggressive growl growing louder by the second. He looks up just as the first Lancaster bursts into view, racing straight toward the dam at impossible speed and altitude. The night explodes into chaos. Searchlights snap on, their beams stabbing at the sky. Anti-aircraft guns swing down in confusion, their crews scrambling to lower barrels never meant to fire this close to the ground. Tracer rounds tear across the water, skipping and ricocheting. The Lancaster holds steady. Inside the cockpit, Gibson watches the converging beams of the bomb-aiming device line up on the dam wall. The altimeter needle trembles at 60 feet. The speed is perfect. The aircraft roars forward, steady, unwavering, straight into a storm of fire. Bomb gone. The upkeep weapon drops cleanly from the bomb bay, spinning violently backward. It hits the water with a sharp slap, then skips. Once, twice, 3 times. Each bounce brings it closer to the dam, the moonlight glinting off its dark, cylindrical body. German gunners fire wildly now. Bullets rake the water, strike the aircraft's wings, punch holes through aluminum skin. Still the Lancaster climbs away, engines screaming. The bomb strikes the dam wall and disappears beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the water detonates. A massive, concussive blast erupts against the dam's base, sending a towering column of spray into the air. The concrete shudders, cracks spiderweb outward. The entire structure groans like a wounded animal, but it does not break. Not yet. A second Lancaster dives in. Then a third. One aircraft is hit and spirals away, trailing fire, crashing into the hills beyond the reservoir. Another releases 2 Lateth bombs, skips wide, and detonates harmlessly. But the crews press on, one after another, flying into the same wall of fire, learning from each attempt, adjusting by seconds, by feet. On the dam crest, German soldiers dive for cover. The ground shakes beneath them. Chunks of concrete rain down. The air is filled with smoke, water vapor, and the scream of engines tearing past at mast height. Finally, another explosion hits deeper, harder. This time, the dam gives way. A section of the Merhan Dam collapses inward with a deafening roar. The reservoir surges forward, a black wall of water exploding through the breach. In seconds, millions of tons of water are unleashed downstream, accelerating into a deadly flood. Villages vanish under the surge. Bridges are ripped from their foundations. Power stations are drowned. Factories go dark. Rail lines twist and collapse as the water tears through the valley. From the air, the British crews watch in stunned silence. What was once a controlled lake is now a weapon they have just set loose. Deep inside Germany's command structure, phones begin to ring. And no one yet understands the scale of what has just happened. The flood does not move like water anymore, it moves like a living force. Downstream from the shattered Merhan Dam, the first villages are struck within minutes. Sleeping houses are ripped from their foundations as the surge barrels through narrow valleys, gaining speed, gathering debris, tearing trees out by the roots. Entire streets vanish beneath churning black water. Livestock, vehicles, railcars, pieces of factories all are swept together into a single, unstoppable mass. In the darkness, sirens begin to wail, but they are too late. At power stations along the Ruhr, engineers scramble as turbines scream and fail. Control rooms flood in seconds. Electrical grids collapse one by one, plunging industrial towns into sudden darkness. Steel mills fall silent mid-production, molten metal cooling uselessly inside furnaces. Conveyor belts grind to a halt. Assembly lines die where they stand. Germany's war industrialized pride of the Reich stops breathing. At a railway junction near Neheim, a night freight train loaded with coal is hit broadside by the surge. The locomotive tips, slides, and disappears, rails twisting like wire beneath it. Bridges that took years to construct are ripped away in moments. Communication lines snap. Roads vanish. Rescue vehicles cannot reach flooded areas because there are no longer roads to drive on. Above it all, British bombers race homeward, flying low and scattered, engines damaged, fuel gauges sinking toward empty. Some limp across the North Sea on one engine. Others never make it back. When dawn breaks over England, empty dispersal bays tell their own quiet story of loss. But in Germany, the shock is only beginning. At dawn, Reich officials arrive in the Ruhr Valley to a landscape that no longer resembles the maps on their desks. Water still pours through the breach in the dam, a roaring cataract impossible to control. Engineers shout orders that cannot be carried out. Equipment lies submerged or destroyed. Thousands of forced laborers and civilians are pulled from the wreckage, alive and dead alike. Then the reports begin to reach Berlin. Albert Speer, Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production, studies the numbers in disbelief. Power generation in the Ruhr has collapsed. Coal production is halted. Steel output is falling by the hour. Entire transportation corridors are unusable. Repair estimates stretch from weeks into months' time Germany does not have. Worse still, the psychological impact spreads faster than the water ever did. German generals argue over responsibility. Anti-aircraft commanders demand explanations from local garrisons. Intelligence officers scramble to understand how British aircraft penetrated deep into Germany, at night, at low altitude, and struck targets thought invulnerable. The dams were supposed to be safe. They were never meant to be defended like cities. Now they must be. Orders go out immediately. Thousands of workers are pulled from tank factories, aircraft plants, and weapons depots, and sent to the Ruhr with concrete, steel, and tools. Emergency labor battalions are formed overnight. Prisoners of war and forced laborers are marched into the flood zone under armed guard, tasked with clearing debris and rebuilding shattered infrastructure. Every man sent to repair the dams is a man not building weapons. Every ton of concrete poured into the Ruhr is concrete not used for bunkers on the Atlantic Wall. Hitler demands answers. Furious meetings stretch late into the night. Accusations fly. Promises are mad new defenses, new patrols, new guns positioned around every major dam in the Reich. Fighter squadrons are reassigned. Searchlights multiply. The illusion of safety is gone forever. Meanwhile, in England, the surviving crews of 617 Squadron gather quietly. Their uniforms are stained with oil and sweat. Faces are hollowed by exhaustion and loss. Guy Gibson reads the roll of those who did not return. The room is silent as each name falls like a weight. The mission is a success, but it has come at a cost. Only later do the full effects become clear. Production figures show a sharp drop across multiple sectors. Coal shortages ripple outward. Factories far from the flood zone slow or stop entirely because rail lines and power supplies no longer function. German planners are forced to prioritize repairs over expansion, survival over ambition. One raid, one night, one unconventional weapon, and an entire region, industrial engine of Nazi Germany has been thrown into chaos. The German High Command had believed such devastation would require sustained bombing over months, perhaps years. Instead, it took a single, precisely executed strike to do what entire bomber formations had failed to achieve. The dams are rebuilt eventually, but the Damagito infrastructure, morale, and confidence is permanent. The Ruhr Valley will never feel safe again. In Berlin, the air grows heavy with blame. Maps are rolled out across conference tables inside the Reich Chancellery, their clean lines now mocked by reality. Red grease-pencil circles mark the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heart of Germany, now a wounded organ struggling to function. Senior generals lean in, voices clipped, tempers sharp. They are men used to commanding armies across continents. And yet, they have just watched an entire region crippled by a handful of aircraft, and a weapon no one had taken seriously. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel demands explanations. Luftwaffe officers argue that the dams were civilian infrastructure, not military targets, never intended to be defended like cities. Anti-aircraft commanders counter that no one warned them to prepare. Intelligence officers admit, quietly, that British low-level night training had been observed but dismissed. That dismissal now costs Germany dearly. Hitler's reaction is volcanic. Witnesses later recall his rage not merely at the destruction, but at the implication. If the dams can be destroyed, then nowhere is safe. The Reich's carefully constructed image of invulnerability has been punctured in front of the world. Orders are issued in a fury. All major dams are to be defended immediately. Flak batteries are stripped from airfields and cities and repositioned along reservoirs. Smoke generators are installed to obscure targets. Fighter patrols are expanded, draining already thin Luftwaffe resources. It is a defensive scramble Germany cannot afford. Albert Speer calculates the true cost. Tens of thousands of workers are now tied up in repair and defense. Rail traffic remains disrupted for weeks. Emergency power rationing spreads far beyond the Ruhr. Even when factories restart, they operate below capacity. Production schedules are rewritten. Deadlines slip. The war machine stutters. The generals do not say it aloud, but they all understand the truth. This was not just sabotage. It was strategic paralysis. Across the channel, the tone is very different but no less serious. At RAF Scampton, debriefings stretch through the day. Engineers examine damaged aircraft, counting bullet holes, measuring blast effects, refining data. The raid is dissected piece by piece. What worked? What failed? What nearly ended in disaster? Barnes-Wallis pores over reports with quiet intensity. His bomb worked but only just. Variations in height, speed, and release timing meant success was never guaranteed. He knows how close it came to failure. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris listens carefully, outwardly reserved. He has never been a believer in precision attacks on infrastructure. His doctrine is simple: overwhelm the enemy with mass bombing, break cities, break morale. And yet, the evidence now lies in front of him. One squadron has done what hundreds of bombers could not. The British press senses it immediately. Though details are initially censored, rumors spread. Headlines speak of devastating raids and ingenious weapons. When official confirmation comes, the public reaction is electric. Photographs of the crews appear in newspapers. Guy Gibson becomes a household name overnight. But behind closed doors, British planners see something even more important than morale. They see possibility. If dams can be destroyed, so can power stations, bridges, canals, factor-specific nodes that hold entire systems together. The raid forces a reevaluation of what air power can do when it targets structure instead of sprawl. Precision, not saturation. Intelligence, not just tonnage. The Americans, watching closely, take notes. In Germany, the lessons cut the opposite way. Every dam now requires defenses. Every potential target must be guarded. The Reich's war economy becomes riddled with new vulnerabilities. The resources needed to protect them are finite. Fighter squadrons meant for the Eastern Front are pulled back. Flak guns meant to defend cities are spread thin across countryside and reservoirs. The British have not destroyed Germany's ability to fight, but they have forced it to fight differently, and that perhaps is the most damaging outcome of all, because the war is no longer just at the front lines. It is now embedded deep inside Germany's own infrastructure, its water, its power, its transport, its very ability to function as a modern state. And the German generals know it. They do not say it in their reports. They do not admit it in public. But in private, in late-night meetings and guarded conversations, the same realization keeps surfacing. If one dam can do this, what happens when the next one falls? June 1943. The Ruhr Valley is quieter, no, but not healed. Weeks after the water receded, the damage still defines everything. Mud clings to walls like a second skin. Rail lines twist unnaturally where ballast was scoured away. Power pylons lie snapped and half-buried, their cables tangled like nerves ripped from the ground. In towns downstream of the Murhan and Eder dams, civilians move through streets that no longer feel familiar. Landmarks are gone. Whole neighborhoods erased, not by fire but by force. German engineers work in shifts that never end. Floodlights burn through the night as repair crews pour concrete, rebuild embankments, and relay rail lines under constant pressure from Berlin. Organization Taut drafts thousands of additional laborers. Prisoners of war and forced laborers are brought in under guard, marched into the wreckage to shovel, lift, and die anonymously. The generals demand timelines. Speer demands numbers. Neither is satisfied. Electricity remains unreliable. Factories restart, then stall again. Steel production lags. Coal shipments bottleneck. Barges can't move efficiently through damaged canals. Each disruption compounds the next, rippling outward across the German war economy. It is not catastrophic collapse, but it is relentless friction. Death by 1,000 delays. Inside German high command reports, the language grows evasive. Phrases like temporary setbacks and localized disruption appear again and again. But buried in annexes and footnotes are the real figures: lost output measured not in days, but months. And worse, something intangible has changed. Confidence. Before the raid, the Ruhr was assumed secure. Too far inland, too complex, too heavily defended by geography itself. Now that assumption is gone. Every reservoir becomes a potential weapon against Germany. Every stretch of infrastructure is reconsidered, not just for its usefulness but for its vulnerability. Resources are diverted accordingly. Flak towers rise near dams instead of cities. Searchlights sweep water instead of skies. Smoke generators hiss into action whenever aircraft are reported anywhere in Western Germany, blanketing reservoirs in artificial fog that disrupts visibility but also disrupts daily operations. It is an enormous defensive tax. Meanwhile, RAF Bomber Command absorbs the lesson in a very different way. At briefing rooms across England, Operation Chastise is studied not as a miracle but as a blueprint. Aircrews are shown diagrams of the dams. Analysts break down the precise conditions that allowed success: altitude discipline, speed control, specialized training, intelligence preparation. The takeaway is clear. Precision works but only when everything aligns. The dambusters themselves scatter. Some are promoted. Others return to routine operations. Their losses linger empty bunks, half-finished letters, aircraft that never come back. Guy Gibson himself struggles with the weight of it all, the sudden fame clashing with the knowledge that most of his men did not survive the year. And yet the impact of what they did keeps growing. German reconnaissance confirms what British planners suspected: resources tied up in dam defense are resources not used elsewhere. Fighter strength in key regions weakens. Flak coverage around industrial targets thins. The Reich's air defense becomes reactive, stretched, increasingly inefficient. By late 1943, Allied bombing campaigns intensify. They hit power plants. They hit rail junctions. They hit oil facilities. Each strike is not devastating on its own but layered atop the disruption Chastais introduced. The cumulative effect is severe. The Ruhr never fully recovers its parade efficiency. Even as repairs finish, the redundancy is gone. There is no margin for error left. In hindsight, German officers begin to understand what truly happened. The dams were not the target. The system was. Operation Chastais did not aim to destroy Germany's industry outright. It aimed to expose how fragile modern industrial warfare really was. Dependent it was on nodes, bottlenecks, and assumptions of safety. The floods simply made those dependencies visible. Years later, some German engineers would admit that the raid forced them to rethink civil defense entirely, that it accelerated Germany's shift toward underground factories and decentralized production out of innovation. But fear. Fear born on one night in May. And that fear lingers. Even as the waters settle, even as the dams are rebuilt stronger than before, the psychological breach remains. The generals know that Britain, and soon Americano, understands how to strike not armies, but arteries. The Ruhr keeps working. Germany keeps fighting. But the rhythm is broken. And somewhere deep in the calculations of Allied planners, the lesson of the dams is carried forward, quietly shaping how the air war will be fought from here on out. Not louder, not bigger, but smarter. July 1943. Berlin. Bendeleblock. In a windowless briefing room thick with cigarette smoke, senior officers of the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe sit, hunched over maps that no longer inspire confidence. The Ruhr Valley is marked with red grease pencil arrows, circles, annotations layered atop one another like scars. Field Marshal Erhard Milch listens in silence. He has read the reports. He has seen the figures. He knows the truth, even as subordinates soften their language. Operation Chastais did not win the air war for the Allies, but it exposed something Germany had desperately hoped was not real. That the Reich could be hurt far from the front. General Engineers present reconstruction updates. New dam faces reinforced with concrete. Anti-torpedo nets installed. Flak positions expanded. Patrol schedules increased. On paper, everything looks stronger than before. Milch asks a single question. How many men are now tied to this? No one answers immediately, because everyone knows the number is obscene. Tens of thousands of soldiers, engineers, laborers, and guardsmen who are not fighting on the Eastern Front, not manning flak towers in Berlin, not training as pilots. They are guarding water, defending gravity, and that, Milch understands, is the real cost. The German war economy was built on the assumption that depth equaled safety, that industrial regions protected by distance, terrain, and layered defenses were immune to disruption. Chastais shattered that belief. It proved that if an enemy understood the system well enough, they did not need to destroy everything. They only needed to break the right thing. This realization spreads quietly through the German command structure. Not publicly, not in speeches, but in planning documents, in changed priorities, in a growing defensiveness that borders on paranoia. Every reservoir is inspected, every bridge reassessed, every concentration of infrastructure is viewed through a new lens. Not can it be defended, but what happens if it fails? Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Allies are drawing their own conclusions. Operation Chastais is debated fiercely. Some argue it was too costly, too risky, too dependent on unique circumstances that could not be replicated. Others counter that its true value was never measured in tons of concrete destroyed but in the strategic distortion it forced upon Germany. And time proves the latter camp correct. By 1944, German air defenses are fragmented. Fighters are shuffled endlessly to respond to perceived threats. Flak is over-concentrated in places that may never be attacked again. The Reich is defending everything and, therefore defending nothing efficiently. The dams still stand, but they stand guarded, feared, obsessed over. In the Ruhr Valley, civilians live under a new kind of tension. Sirens no longer signal only bombs but water. Evacuation plans include flood maps. Children are taught where to run if the dams fail again. The idea that destruction can come without warning, without fire, settles into daily life. For German generals, this is the quiet defeat they never anticipated. Not surrender, not invasion, but the loss of certainty. Years later, Allied analysts would describe Operation Chastise as one of the first true demonstrations of systems warfare. An attack not on forces, but on the invisible connections that make modern war possible: power, transport, logistics, morale. The men who flew that night did not have that language. They only knew the altitude, the speed, the distance to the dam wall. They knew the sound of flak tearing past their cockpits, the weight of a weapon that had to be released at precisely the right moment or not at all. They knew that most of them would not come back. And yet, what they set in motion reached far beyond the valleys they flooded. It reached into German planning rooms, into production schedules, into the daily calculations of a war machine forced, for the first time, to defend itself against the consequences of its own complexity. The generals never truly recovered from that shock, because once you realize a single, well-aimed strike can paralyze an entire region, you never stop looking over your shoulder. And